You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, it's lovely to have you back again. This is Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. And I'm Steve Adams, or Mighty Blue. It's been quite a few days for me, and I'm going to go into it after our main interview today. And those main guests are really two super people who I would never have imagined would hike the AT. As always, assuming stuff, particularly in regard to hiking and who can be successful on a hike, is a dangerous game. Carolyn Walker and Gordon Yhap are two people who I'm sure I would have doubted their chances of making it to Katahdin if I met them in the first couple of days in Georgia. But they persevered, and as we say, 5 million steps later, there they were, standing wrapped in a Guyanese flag, as Gordon became the first ever Guyanese to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail, with Carolyn beside him every step of the way. They're an inspiration to any of you who may doubt your ability to do this. They're going to be along soon. Kate Stillwell, or Phoenix, is our woman of a certain age, and as you'll hear, she has checked off a particularly difficult state. Kate will be along after Gordon and Carolyn. Finally, of course, we have the second half of Chapter 14 from Grandma Gatewood's Walk. It's quite a long chapter, and I split it into two last week because the show was getting rather long. If you recall, Emma's just crossed into Maine and reflecting upon her own epic journey. So let's go for it. Here are Carolyn Walker and Gordon Yhap, or Lucky 59 and Pepperpot. My guests today are, I think, a great example of why you should never judge a book by its cover. They're Carolyn and Gordon Walker, or Pepperpot and Lucky 59. Hi guys, how are you?
Hi, fine, thanks.
All right.
Good. Now, I only discovered today that you were Pepperpot and Lucky 59, so let's start with that. Why? I presume, well, hopefully you're Pepperpot, I think, Carolyn, and Lucky 59 must be Gordon. Is that the other way around?
No, the other way around.
Perfect, even better. So tell us why you got that nickname then, Gordon.
Well, she's the one that gave me that name, and I would prefer either Jaguar or Puma because those are Guyana's two main national animals.
All right.
In the jungles.
Right.
And before we left Jacksonville, she said, "Hey, why you don't go become Pepperpot? Because Pepperpot also is one of Guyana's main dishes, food."
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a lot of spice and pepper and
right
meat, and it's really hot. So she said, "Why you don't be Pepperpot?" So I said,
so she thought you were really hot. Excellent.
Yeah.
It's a lovely thing.
I guess I don't know.
lovely in your late 50s to still be thought really hot by your wife. That's marvelous. So why are you the Lucky 59 then, Carolyn?
Well, I was born in 1959, and for most of the trail, I was 59 years old. And I thought we were really lucky for being able to retire before we were 60 and hike the trail. But I have to tell you, one of my biggest regrets in hiking the AT is that I didn't allow a name to be picked for me from some other hiker once we were out there, because I never really liked Lucky 59 very much. I thought it was pretty inane, and I thought of changing it a couple of times, but then I thought, well, maybe it's bad luck to change your name, kind of like changing the name on a boat, you know. And if you don't mind, let me just tell you one quick little story that made me really regret my name.
Sure.
We had met a section hiker in Virginia somewhere, and he was this really clean-cut guy about our age, and we were eating lunch at one of the shelters, and so was he. And he was real conservative, a white guy, probably 6 feet tall, well-dressed. He looked clean, unlike us. And so, of course, we exchanged trail names, and his trail name was Thriller. And I said, Thriller? Where'd you get that name? That's funny. And he said, oh, you know, it's been really, it was still really cold at that point, or just, you know, the winter was just ending. And he said, one morning I couldn't find one of my gloves. And so I only had one glove on. So all day I'm taking this glove between my two hands because my hands were freezing. And so my fellow hiker said, oh, you're just like Michael Jackson in Thriller with one glove. And I thought, That is such a great name. It's a perfect example of why you shouldn't pick your own stupid trail name. So anyway.
Well, funny enough, I picked my own trail name, and I'm still happy I did. You know, with Mighty Blue, it seems to have stuck with me, and I kind of like that. But I know there are a lot of hikers think you should absolutely not pick your own trail name. So, you know, perhaps if you do it another time, you'd let somebody pick your trail name.
Well, Mighty Blue is a good one. That came from an underperforming football or soccer team, right? From your hometown.
Very good. Yes.
And a good name.
And indeed very underperforming. Yeah. Yeah. Now, a friend of the show, Bruce Matson, sent me a copy of an email that you sent him, Carolyn. And in it, you mentioned that you read his book about hiking the AT, and that you'd also hiked in 2018. Why you didn't meet Bruce? He thought you had a story to tell. And as I said at the beginning, you seem to be an unlikely couple to hike the AT. How did it come about in the first place that you went out there?
Well, my whole life, I loved to read adventure travel books from being a little kid. I remember going to every library that I could in whatever town I lived in, and I would tear through the shelf, reading every book about long distance sailing and climbing Mount Everest and anything I could find. And probably 8 or 10 years ago, I stumbled across my first book about the AT. And I thought, I know what the Appalachian Trail is, because I'd grown up my younger years in eastern Pennsylvania, so I had heard of it. And I thought, wow, this was a great book. So I read every single book I could find on the AT. And at this point, I could get books electronically. So there was, a bunch of them out there. And I read them all, including yours. And so as we came close to retiring, we decided to retire early, but we kind of are on a really strict budget. And I said, hey, Gordon, we got to find something to do for a few years until we start collecting Social Security at least. We're going to have to live cheaply. And I said, we could go hike the AT. That'd take 6 months. We'd be living out of backpacks in a tent. That can't cost very much. And at the time, Gordon was in Guyana running a business. And he said, oh, whatever you want. That's fine. If you want, I'll come home and do it. And I said, it's just walking. We like to walk. So that's what we did.
You realize, of course, he wasn't actually listening to you because we've already discussed who talks the most. So believe me, he wasn't paying any attention at all. So when you actually realized what she'd said, Gordon, what did you think of her suggestion of living in a tent for 6 months?
Well, it never really got to me. It was like, oh yes, let's do it. And it's until I came back to Florida and starting to see a lot of shows on YouTube and books that she got from the libraries and from off the internet and started to show it to me. I was like, oh man, this is a good, nice walk, 2,000 miles walk. I was like, oh, really? I could do this. Yeah, I said I could do this. So I said, all right, let's do it. And then when she retired, we got the packages, and she put all the packages and everything together.
The food
packages and the sent to the different states and the different counties and the different lodges. And so when the time came,
you basically said, just get on with it then, and I'll come along with you.
I was bugging her for a long time. Let's do it. Even we was trying to get her to quit her job early. So let's do it, because it was like a year and a half or so before we had talked about it.
Yeah, we planned for it for quite a while.
It was like, I'm waiting. And it's like, no, let's do it. And she said, no, let's wait. And I waited, and then we did it. And I'm glad I did it.
I'm sure you are. Had either of you done any hiking in your previous lives? I mean, you read about it, obviously, Carolyn. Had either of you done anything of any significance before?
No, not until we did some hikes right before the AT, just to test equipment and so forth.
You said that you did a hike in Guyana, your home country, Gordon. You told me about a 4-day trek to see a famous waterfall, which I'd never heard of, by the way. But tell us about that experience.
Well, as a kid, let's go back. As a young kid, my parents, my mother, her family, I don't know if you know of the Amerindian tribe, the Arawaks and Caribs. That's how the Caribbean got its name, from Caribs.
All right, okay.
And the Arawaks, the two main tribes in Guyana. And they used to talk about Kaitro Falls. And as I went to school and I learned about Kaitro Falls, is one of the highest falls in the world.
Right.
with the huge drop of water that comes down from 700 and
Oh, I think I've seen the picture.
Something like that.
I think I've seen the picture of it. Yeah, spectacular.
It's on Discovery Channel, and it's in
yes, I think I have.
Smithsonian and all that.
Yeah.
And one year I told her, let's go to Guyana, and she said, all right, let's go. So we go, and then she started to check out all these different things that we should do, and Kaichor came up, and she wanted to go to Kaichor, so I said, let's go to Kaichor. We organized a trip, and this guy took us from buses to boats to hiking, and then when we get to the foot of the Kaichor Falls, we had to climb the 700 something feet behind the falls.
Nice.
And come to the top of the falls.
Right.
And I don't think we had to wait on her a couple of times because she was slow.
A couple of times? You had to wait for me the whole way up the mountain.
Most of the time.
He's being kind, Carolyn. He's being kind.
Because she was really slow. I guess she never really did no kind of hiking, and it's a steep hike, and she was tired and she fell a couple of times and
asked for a helicopter to come get me out.
I don't think she got that far on the helicopter, but I think if it was a couple thousand feet, like the Appalachian Trail, she probably would have called for a helicopter to get her.
Well, I'll tell you, none of this is making me think it was a good idea to go on a 2,200-mile hike. So I'm still not quite there yet. So you're obviously very determined people. How were you able to research the gear that you were going to need for such a long hike? Because it isn't always that straightforward, is it? There are so many different things you can get and so many different pieces of advice on the internet. Who did you trust on the internet?
Well, obviously there's a million resources out there.
Sure.
The ATC puts out information. I think AWOL probably puts out information. There's a million YouTube videos, especially we hiked in 2018. So I started purchasing things in probably early 2017.
Right.
But I really just read reviews and lists and went to REI once we actually had lived in the Florida Keys for about 35 years, but we had just moved up to Jacksonville where our sons were in college, and there's an REI there. So going in there and talking to the salespeople, and we just picked really common, popular items like Osprey packs and Z-Pack tent and Z-Pack quilt. And we're pretty satisfied with those choices. But you're right. There's a million things out there. It's
not cheap,
it is
though,
bewildering.
Is it? You talked about having to sort of reduce, you have to live on a pension and all that sort of thing. It's not cheap to do this hike, is it? Especially for two people, I would think.
No, it's not inexpensive. And, that made pretty obvious birthday and Christmas presents, for the year preceding our hike.
All right.
To get each other backpacks or what to ask my parents for. So.
But did your family, I'm still not convinced this was a thing for you to do, even though you've done it, right? And you know what I mean. You know what I mean by that. So did your family respond in a positive way? What did your kids think about it?
Well, we had been doing some long distance bicycling and also around the same time.
All right.
And we've always gone on pretty adventurous vacations. So I think we have two sons that are in their 20s. They really took it in stride. My mother kind of shrugged her shoulders and said, good luck. I've got a brother and his wife and his whole family are really, really adventurous and go on great travel adventures all around the world. So they were like, hey, that's a pretty normal thing to do. So I don't think any of my work friends, any of our friends in the Keys said that, oh, gosh, you're crazy for doing something like this. They just thought, well, that's pretty predictable that you guys would do something like that. And Gordon, your family in Guyana, I don't think they could understand the scope of this at all, right?
They just couldn't understand it.
Don't you think, though, it's quite difficult to understand it yourself? I remember thinking before I started, 2,200 miles, it's almost impossible to get into your head how far it is. And then you struggle through the first 3 days to get to, I think it's Suches or Neil's Gap is 30 miles, 4 days. And you think, I've got to do that about another 100 times. And you think to yourself, that is a nightmare. I don't think I ever put it in my mind, the end at all, until about 500 miles from the end. Did you approach it that way?
I approached it basically one step at a time. And I remember there's Confucius or somebody made a quote that 1,000-mile journey begins with a single step.
Yep.
And I used to tell myself that like during the day as I was hiking. But every single hiker that we would run into would say to us, oh, are you guys thru-hikers? Where are you hiking? And every single time Gordon would say Katahdin, and that was from like the first day.
Excellent effort.
And some of the people didn't even know what Katahdin was. And then I'd have to say, yeah, it's in Maine. And they'd say, Maine? What but with Gordon, I mean, isn't that true? Right from the beginning, you intended to get to Katahdin.
Yeah,
that was it.
That's what my objective, and that's what was my goal, to get to Katahdin. So if you ask me where I'm going to Katahdin.
Excellent. I love that. And I know that you had quite an interesting footwear choice for the 100-mile wilderness, didn't you, Gordon?
Yeah.
Yeah. That part of your gear didn't work out so well. Tell us about that.
Well, we went to REI in Jacksonville on, they were selling used equipment, gears and boots and all kind of different stuff.
Used boots? You're selling used boots?
Used.
I know what you said, yeah.
Yeah, pre-worn gear, including clothing, including shoe wear.
I guess people bring back stuff and then they sell them. And I'm asleep and she woke me up and said, let's go to REI and see what they got. So we get there. I bought a pair of used Merrells, right?
Merrell boots, yeah.
And she bought some other stuff and thing. And when we left, I wore this used Merrell boots until we get to, is it Black Bear?
Yeah, up in New York. They made it all the way from Georgia to New York.
A
used pair of Merrells.
Yes.
With no foot pain, no blisters. He had no foot problems.
Amazing.
In these, unlike me.
Yeah, and then when we got to New York, well, before we got to New York, the boots fall apart and everything, but that was like about 1,300 miles.
Amazing.
Then we got to New York. We went to this other huge REI store. Oh man, it's like twice the size of Jacksonville REI.
Right.
And I bought a brand new pair of Merrells. We got back, throw away the old one, put the new one on. I hike all the way to
maybe the beginning of Maine.
Yeah, right around there, and that one fall apart too.
Uh-huh.
So, but I taped it up with duct tape, and we got to
Shaw's Hostel in Monson.
You see some of the names. You see, I'm not familiar with the names because my brain wasn't fixed on places. My brain was fixed to get to Katahdin.
Katahdin, that's the only place you knew. Yeah,
right. That's the only place I knew. Right.
Right.
And when we left there, we went to the beginning of the 100-mile wilderness. I just took off the old boots, put it in my backpack, put on a pair of Rubbermaid slippers that we had bought at Walmart.
Yeah, Walmart.
And she didn't want me to bring the boots, the slippers. She was fighting with me to leave the slippers home. And I was fighting with her. No, I'm going to take the slippers. And luckily, I took the slippers because that's the slippers I had to wear throughout the 100-mile wilderness.
Oh my gosh.
And we would meet other hikers and they'd take one look at him and say, man, you're hardcore up here on these mountains in these plastic flip-flops.
So how were your feet then? You said you got no foot problems at all with your boots. How did your feet cope with the Walmart slippers then? Do you get blisters with those?
No. But it was raining. There was a lot of rain.
Yeah,
it was raining too. So it came in. It worked out because of the rain, and then we had to cross a lot of streams. So
perfect.
Instead of me having to take off my boots and things, I just had to take my slippers off and cross the streams or the creeks or whatever, get to the other side and put it on back. While she had to take off and put on and.
Yeah. You obviously worked it out there, Gordon. and you actually started the trail even earlier than Bruce on February the 14th, 2018. Yeah. And it was an incredibly cold start that year. Did you find the cold difficult, and how were you able to cope with it?
Well, for me, I'm not accustomed to the cold.
Of course.
And when we started getting to like 4, 5, 6 inches of snow on the ground, I was like, oh, man, the gears that Carolyn bought for us was supposed to keep you warm.
Right.
and dry.
And it's better that I had gone without shirt or anything, how cold I was, And at nights, it was bad too, because like water was coming through the tent.
Oh my gosh.
It didn't really come through. We had a single wall tent.
Right,
So
yeah.
the condensation would build on the inside from just our warmth from our breathing. And if we touched it, it would all rain down on us.
Oh, yes.
Because it was single wall to save weight. So
Well, I had a Z-Pax as well, and I used to keep the vestibule open because in that weather you couldn't keep the vestibule open at all, could you?
no, it was too fierce. So, yeah, I mean, we dealt with it. But to save the few ounces by having a single wall tent, it was still worth it. We just had to be careful. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and there is some instances in big ball.
The humps?
The humps.
Big hump and little hump?
Yeah. In big hump, there was wind of about 60, 70 miles an hour.
Oh, wow. That is exposed up there as well, isn't it?
It was bad.
Gosh.
We couldn't even keep our pack covers on the packs. They would just blow away. So we couldn't even put those on.
Visibility was less than 100 yards.
Wow.
How it was tough, man. It was terrible. And she had on this big sombrero like hat on her head, and it blew it off, and I had to go get it. And I stepped into, I don't know if it was a trench cover with snow or
a drift
or what. Something. But when I stepped 1 foot down, my whole leg went down into this snow.
Oh my gosh.
and I was not going to bring in my other foot into the snow. So I leave 1 foot up on the ledge or on the ground, and I stretched and got her hat for her. And this woman would not come and help me get this hat or try to pull me out from this. All she wanted is her hat. So I gave her a hat and continue walking for like a couple of hours, 3, 4, 5 hours or whatever before we see people come in.
Well, we got down off that elevation finally.
It was, man, some place was terrible, man.
And you experienced a lot of snow, some of the iconic places on the trail. Obviously in the Smokies you got it. And you said also Beauty Spot. So that really lasted, that snow, into your hike a long way, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it did, until we got to Daleville, Virginia, and all of a sudden everything was green and it just warmed up and we were able to send home our winter things. And by the way, one of the things we bought that really paid off were waterproof socks, because
really?
Yeah, they would keep our feet from getting totally soaked and frozen. Yes. And then at night we would sleep with them in a Ziploc bag in our sleeping bag so they wouldn't freeze. So even though our boots were frozen the next morning from being wet and, the temperature dropping, these waterproof socks, we'd put them back on and our feet wouldn't be freezing cold. So if, any future hikers are looking for tips, that's a tip. If you start early, it's worth the investment to get these waterproof socks and then just send them home when you don't need them anymore. They were worth it.
Now, I've often wondered with couples who hike, who's leading the way? Who sets the pace? How did you two resolve that? Or didn't you, or did you just hike separately for a little while and just meet up later on? Or did you literally within a couple of feet of each other all the time?
We hiked with each other the entire hike. We never separated, but the pace was a big problem. Gordon probably could have easily hiked about 3 miles an hour the whole time. I struggled to hike 2 miles an hour. And, we never really thought about, we wanted to finish the hike by October. We started early because I was afraid that I would be so slow that we would have a hard time finishing by October 15th when, it's likely Baxter would close.
Yeah.
And that's why we started early. So once we started meeting, and that was like our only goal, it was to finish the hike in one hiking season.
Yeah.
But when we started meeting other hikers, they would fly by us, especially the millennials, just fly by us. And Gordon would watch these guys go and girls, and he's real competitive. And he'd look at me and say, this is ridiculous. We're the slowest people out here. And then occasionally somebody our age or older than us, they'd go past us. And Gordon would watch them walking by, we'd see the back of their backpacks as they went on up the trail. And he's just like, man, we are really the slowest ones out here. It caused some tension, that I just couldn't go faster. And, we finished the trail in 5.5 months, and we did it by
in 5.5 months.
5.5 months.
Wow. Good for you. That's amazing.
But we did it. We never had any injuries. We never got off the trail. We, took 1 0 in Damascus, but other than that, we'd only take a 0 maybe once every 2 weeks or so. Wow. But we were up hiking every single morning at first light, and as the season got warmer, that would be earlier and earlier. But basically, we'd hike 12 hours a day and keep plodding on. I don't even think we'd take our packs off for snacks and lunch. We would just sit down, eat a lunch, get back up, keep going. And, that's how we finished the trail in a reasonable time. But I believe that if Gordon had hiked it without me, he probably could have done it in 4 months, because you're just so much faster.
So what's your longest day then by hiking all day long?
I think we hiked 27 miles in Vermont one day.
That's good in Vermont. That's not easy, is it?
It wasn't easy. And I think we did it out of necessity. We wanted to get to a town the next morning early before noon. And we were trying to get to a shelter. So that was definitely a long day. But our average was, our goal each day would be around 18 to, about 18 miles was our goal.
That's a good mileage.
Just like anybody else, we started out slow, got up to 20s in the whites, halved our speed and so forth. So very typical.
But once you got through the cold and you say you got through that by Daleville and you got into the rhythm of the hike, what was it about the hiking lifestyle that appealed to you? Were you enjoying it at that time? Because it sounds to me, I'm still not entirely convinced it was the thing for you to do, but you're still there. So what was it about just the day-to-day of hiking that really appealed to you?
I have to say now when I look back at the hike, it is with definite nostalgia. I want to hike again. Everything seems rosy to me. It's kind of like childbirth. You get through it, but then you look back and it didn't seem so bad. But I guess what appealed to me is simply having a task every day and then a long-term goal that you're working towards, So each day's task, get up and hike 18 miles and we'd accomplish it. So, I have this great feeling of accomplishment when we'd get to the tent at night. And we always carried a little bottle of bourbon with us. So we'd get to the tent at night and we'd each have a shot of bourbon. And it was just like, oh man, we achieved it. This is great. We're 20 miles closer to Katahdin. And then having our big end goal there, which we gradually work towards, and then completing it, so that brought me a lot of joy, having a very black and white, goal every single day for that period.
Becoming goal-oriented becomes very, very important on the trail, doesn't it? To know you've got that goal and to achieve it is a wonderful thing every single day.
It was for me, for my personality. Yeah, it was. Yeah. What about you, Gordon?
That's hers. But with mine, from the time the snow stops, we got into rain. And rain like every other day. Some days, serious downpour rain. And we have to keep going. We got into the tent, it's raining. We get up, it's raining. You have to make tea or breakfast inside the tent and hope that the tent don't catch a fire or something. Because we camp with some guys, that burn their tent down, trying to cook inside it. And
oh dear. And not everybody you met thought the two of you would make it. And I know, Gordon, one person told you about people making judgments about your ability to do the whole trail. Was it Fresh Ground was telling you that you'd heard something? And that that sort of made you even more determined to get to Katahdin, didn't it?
Yes. And knowing that I was going to be the first Guyanese to do it too, that made me more determined to get to Katahdin. That's why I keep telling people, they ask me where I'm going, I say Katahdin. So
every time, yeah, every time. And I said, but at one stage you believed you were going to be the second Guyanese, but then how'd you find out you were actually the first?
It's when we got to
Harper's Ferry.
I went to the after finished taking the pictures out and all that stuff that you do when you get to Harper's Ferry. I went to one of the workers there and I asked him, and he told me that I could look it up myself on the internet, and he showed me how to do it. And when I went to all these countries to see which country that their people went on the hike, there was no Guyanese, there was no Guyanese country, there's no Guyanese people. I said, well, wow. Then the guy said, well, you the first Guyanese registered.
That is so cool. That is so darn cool. It really, really is. So you already mentioned about going over Little Hump and Big Hump, which I loved, by the way. In my views, they were great. So would you ever look back on that and think of it as a highlight or something you got through? Or, what are your highlights when you think back to the trail, you think that was amazing?
Well, the amazing thing for me is getting onto Katahdin and taking out the Guyana flag and raise it up in the air with
I've seen the
Carolyn
picture.
next to
I've
me.
seen the picture. That was amazing.
That's how it, and there's other stuff along the way that was amazing and kind of scary at the same time too.
Yes, I'm sure. What about you, Carolyn? What was a highlight for you?
Probably the whites. I started worrying about the whites once we got to Pennsylvania, and I decided I want to read some bloggers' accounts of going through the whites. And I think I was reading the Trek, and I put in the search thing, the whites. And I came up with this couple that had hiked it, and they had a really, really tough time. I don't remember what year it had been, probably, a few years before. And they just, all kinds of bad things happened to them. And I just started really sweating it. I thought, oh my gosh, this is what it's going to be like going through the whites. I don't know if we can make it. We made it this far, but the whites might take us down. I don't know if we can do it. So once we got up, I think Kinsman Mountain, that first southern mountain, was kind of tough.
Yeah, it is.
And we got up there, and I thought, man, this is hard. And then when we got up to right before Lake of the Cloud Hut, there was a really bad sleet storm. I don't think it snowed, right? Remember that thunderstorm we got stuck in up there? And there was also a detour because they were doing maintenance on the regular trail. And we kind of got lost for a little bit. And we stumbled into the Lake of the Clouds hut around noon, begging for a work first day, even though it was so early in the day. I mean, we just got blown in there, with this terrible weather. And in fact, a hiker got lost that night. I think that whole crew had to go out and look for a hiker. It was so bad. Oh. So I thought, man, this is just as bad as what I read. Whites are terrible. But then when we finally got through it, I thought, well, we got through it. And it was just an amazing, as everybody knows, part of the hike. Franconia Ridge is amazing. Oh. And then the mountains in Maine, the Bigelows were beautiful.
Yes.
Moxie. And I have to tell you, since the hike, we bought a little farm, and I have horses now. And I named them Bigelow and Moxie after those two mountains because I thought they were so great.
That's amazing. Great names, yeah. So what about lowlights? Were there ever times, did you ever think to yourself, what are we doing? This is ridiculous. Or was Gordon's I'm going to Katahdin always overarching everything?
Well, we had tough times like everybody, northern Pennsylvania. We went through some really, really bad rain between Duncannon and Delaware Water Gap. And by the way, 2 years ago today, we got into Delaware Water Gap, which was like a huge achievement, finishing Pennsylvania.
But
yeah, I looked at my little diary before the call.
A wonderful moment, yeah.
I know, it was great. But for some reason, we had hiked into, I think it was Atkins, Virginia, where the Barn restaurant is. Yep. And the year we hiked, a bunch of people had gotten sick from the romaine lettuce at the Barn, right when we were there. But between there, we only had a 10-mile hike to the Quarterway Hostel that Chunky runs.
Yeah, lovely.
And I just remember flipping out on that hike. I started crying. I didn't know if I could finish. I don't know. I was having this really terrible time. We both had colds. It was snowing. And I remember Gordon just sitting me down and saying, you want to quit? If you want to quit, we'll quit. And I looked at him and I said, no, I don't want to quit. I just want to get to this hostel and get out of this flipping weather. And so that was like my lowest day. But yeah. And then one other day we were hiking with another couple, and I started to talk about politics, and I'm running my mouth, ranting and raving, and I trip over a root, and I fell right on my head on a stump. And the second I fell, I hit that stump, and I thought, oh, this is it. My hike's done. I probably split my head open. I probably have a concussion. I'm probably going to pass out.
By the way, serves you right for talking about politics on the trail.
Yeah, I know. I said I wrote in my blog and told all my friends. I said, that teaches me. I don't think I talked about politics again the whole time. Yeah. So, but I remember standing up and thinking, oh, I'm okay. So that was kind of a low point there for a few minutes because I thought it was going to end the hike. But
yeah, my feeling about that always is that you fall over. You've got two options. You either you lie on the floor and cry and then eventually die for not getting up. But, you just get up and get on with it, don't you? That's the wonderful thing about the trail. I think that's great. And it sounds to me, Gordon, you probably had no low lights at all because you were always going to go to Katahdin, so you were good to go.
Yeah, I was good to go. I was, whatever she was up to, if she wanted to quit, I quit with her. But if she's ready to want to go on, we go on to the end.
Well, this is a question actually I was going to ask because I've asked this question of couples before, and it's always interested me going with somebody else. If one of you had got injured, would the other one have continued their hike? And does it depend upon which one of you got injured?
I think that if Gordon had gotten injured, I don't know if I would have had the strength of will to continue. And because we were a couple, we never joined a trail family, and we made friends on the trail, and we would hike with some people off and on for, a couple hundred miles. But I didn't have a tight group to hike with if something had happened to him. Plus, I was just slow, so there weren't many hikers that I could have hiked with it would have worked anyway. So I don't know if I would have had the strength of will to continue by myself. What about you, Gordon?
No, I wouldn't go by myself. There's no way.
I knew that was the answer. Because if she's going home, I'm going home.
No, not only that, the whole thing about the Appalachian Trail, for me personally, I don't think it would be wise for me to do it by myself. And I give people that do it by themselves a lot of credit, give them the respect and thing. But for me, I don't think I personally could do it by myself because of all the different. You could get sick there and die, and nobody won't find you for days and until you start to smell or something.
I was doing that a lot, starting to smell after 4 or 5 days.
It's like,
oh dear. So the two of you, what qualities that you both clearly have do you think are necessary to be successful on a long distance hike?
I guess just grit and determination, like anybody that tries to do something that's long and can be boring and it's uncomfortable. Steve, we've done a lot of projects together, whether it's long distance bicycling, which by the way is not nearly as much fun as hiking, and messy house renovations. And right now we've got 14 acres of brambles and woods we're trying to clear, which takes a lot of grit and determination to get out there with the machete and the chainsaw. But I don't know, when we start something, we tend to finish it. And so I guess just that mentality that, quitting really isn't an option. You started it, so you're going to finish it.
But you know what? It is an option if you're not enjoying it. And there were days, I'm sure, when you had to overcome something that you were feeling. I don't think I ever thought of quitting myself either. And part of my reason of not quitting was I was doing a podcast. I didn't want to let everybody down. But, none of us are forced to be out there. And you're right. Sometimes it can be a bit boring and very uncomfortable as well. It's that thing that keeps you going. I think Gordon has already said, Katahdin, that's it. I'm going to Katahdin. Doesn't matter what happens in between, I'm going to be there. But you've got to have something. You have to have that mental strength when the physical strength deserts you, don't you?
Yes, for sure. And you're right. People that do get off the trail get off for a variety of reasons. Often it tears them up. I remember when we were still in Key West, before I had retired, a kid from Key West had hiked, and he gave a little presentation at the local theater one day. And with him was, I guess, his fiance, a girl that he had met on the trail that he was going to marry, and one of his buddies. And the three of them were up on stage. Well, it ends up that the buddy had quit about, I don't know, a month or 6 weeks. 3 months into the hike, and had gone home. But he was here on the stage with his friend who had finished. And all he said was, "Oh my God, I regret quitting. It was so awful." At first couple days, eating pizza, drinking beer, having a dry bed and a shower was great. But that got, that got boring and normal fast. And then I just regretted getting off the trail. So I thought about that kid a lot during the hike. It would be so nice to quit and be comfortable. But the regret that followed this kid, I was sure would follow me as well. So,
I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure. I'm sure. Now, in your email to Bruce, you mentioned that it was all you could do at the end of the day to put up your tent and boil water for dinner. Were you both exhausted every day? Because if you're hiking 12 hours a day, that is a heck of a lot of day to be hiking.
Well, certainly in the beginning, we hiked for 5.5 months. I'd say for 4.5 months, at the end of each day, I would just sit down. I wouldn't even be able to get up to get water. I'd have to beg Gordon to do it for me and just, bribe him with a sip of my shot of the bourbon or something.
Fair exchange. Yeah.
Right, I know. But at the end, once I guess we got into Maine, I felt healthy and fit. I had lost a bunch of weight, and then I was still pretty much okay at the end of the day. So, it changed as I hiked. But what about you, Gordon?
With me, it's like, you got to do it. You got to do it. And I got there at the 10, 13, 14, 18 miles and hungry, but what am I do? Don't do it and go to bed hungry.
That's right.
Or do it and go to bed satisfied, you know.
You've got one of the best attitudes of all I've ever heard, actually, Gordon.
and I just do it, no matter what, you know. This is what I gotta do. I gotta do what I gotta do, you know. I can't sweat them and sweat it. No, you know. And then I got my partner with me. I know if I don't do it, then she's go to bed hungry and she
mad.
might be mad and tossing and rolling and kicking me and all that stuff, but I can't.
Yeah, if Mama ain't happy, no one's happy, is there?
That's right.
Right, you know?
And you lost about 100 pounds between the two of you, didn't you? Both lost 50 each?
Yeah, that's correct. Gordon, of course, since he's a male, lost his quicker and easier than I did, but yeah, that brought such joy to my heart every time we'd get to town and I'd peel my disgusting clothes off and look in the mirror and think, oh man, that's like half an inch thinner now. So yeah, that was excellent.
Oh, great. And when it was over, were you glad that you were done? Because, you know, you'd reached that, Gordon had one goal, was just to get to Katahdin. So, well, I'll ask you actually first, Gordon. Well, so once you got there and you touched the brown sign, did it give you what you needed? Or is it any more than that?
Yeah, it gave me what I needed is getting to the end, and what I started out on, or what we started out on. Sure. Getting to Katahdin, and while she wants to see all these different stuff along the way, those stuff along the way was not in my head. Getting Katahdin, as I said, is in my head, and when I got there, you know, I was happy and everything was joyful, and then the other part was getting down from Katahdin.
That's tough. That's tough as well, isn't it? Getting down again. Oh my God!
Downhill. It's like the longest one.
Oh, that is tough. So, but were you done? I mean, were you glad it was over?
Well, I was glad for less than a week. I was really glad when we hit that sign. I was really glad when we got down to the road. I was really glad when we hitched a ride into Millinocket. And I just remember, like, we took a whole day in Millinocket at the Appalachian Inn, and it was like bittersweet. You know, we're done, and I think there were probably some Southbounders there and a couple other people that had finished, and it was like, you know, great knowing we were done. But then we got back to Florida, and a week later, I actually wrote a little guest blog for the Trek, and I remember my first sentence, or one of the sentences in there was, you know, I'm back in Florida, it's hot, it's boring, all these cars are annoying me, and I just wish I was back up in the woods. So my joy at finishing lasted less than 7 days.
Isn't that amazing? I just want to touch on something just before we finish. When we spoke the other day, you mentioned that you had since hiked the Pinhoti Trail, and you thought it'd be a great shakedown hike for the AT. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, after we were home for a couple of months, I started gaining weight, and I thought, you know, I go to the gym every day. I'm eating salads with oil and vinegar. It's all I'm eating, and I'm gaining weight. So apparently I've got to hike 12 hours a day to, you know, maintain and eat freeze-dried food to lose weight or maintain my weight. So I started looking around for a hike we could do that fall. And the Pinhoti is in Alabama and Georgia, and it's about 330 miles long. And it starts in Alabama at Flag Mountain and finishes at the Benton McKay Trail, very close to Springer. Sure. And I thought, oh, this would be fun. And it'd be nice to do it in the fall. We can see the fall colors in on the mountains. So we did hike it. And the Alabama section is much nicer than the Georgia section. And it does mimic, you know, the early parts of the Appalachian Trail.
Oh, really?
There's shelters. It's a very underutilized trail, but it's well maintained, you know, and it was a real pleasure to hike it. And I just kept thinking, oh, this would have been such a great place for us to come test our equipment instead of where we had tested it, you know, to go out for a shakedown hike, or for somebody that isn't sure that they're going to like the whole experience, to go out there and hike it for a week. So I strongly recommend that to anybody that's just looking for an area to hike that is similar to the Appalachian Trail. And, you know, especially like with us, we didn't want to hike any part of the Appalachian Trail before we started on the thru hike, because I wanted it all to be like brand fresh, fresh and new. I didn't want to spoil anything. So it was a great solution.
But is it accessible in the same way the AT is? Can you get off going to town and things like that?
Yes. Now the trail towns are not, or the towns along the trail are not used to hikers. So we were not successful hitchhiking. I remember going into the post office for a box we had sent ourselves, and the post office clerk looked at me. When she smelled me, she backed up, said, "Can I help you?" I was like, what are you doing here?
Yes,
so
get used to that.
There's no trail community at all. However, there are towns you can access for resupply and, a motel and everything. So that part of it's fine.
Well, look, I'm so glad that Bruce suggested you guys, and he's right. You are an unlikely couple to be actually doing the trail, but you did it. That's just so amazing, and I'm so impressed by the two of you. And I think I'm always going to remember Gordon's thing. I'm going to garden.
That was his mantra.
End of story. There's no other way. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you talking to us.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to interview.
Thank you.
It. Bye, Gordon. All the best.
Okay. Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye. Wasn't that amazing? Gordon seemed totally unfazed when Carolyn suggested the hike. My guess is that she could land old Gordon in a whole lot of trouble one day. I thought they were awesome, and it really proves that you don't have to be a super fit young athlete to do this. Literally, anybody, if they have the perseverance and the grit, can strap on a pair of used Merrells and make it all the way to the end. Now, before we move on to Kate, I want to fill you all in on something that happened over the past couple of days that, frankly, wasted a huge amount of my time and saddened me more than I can tell you. Don't worry, I'm not going to get political. I just need to set the context for you. When this show started to pick up a bunch of listeners, and once again, for context, we now average over 1,000 downloads every day, I received loads of friend requests on Facebook. Really, the Hiking Radio Network Facebook page is where I wanted to interact with listeners, but I thought, why not? People were always nice and friendly, and I had some really good conversations online with some of you. Once again, I'm not going to get political, but the events of the past week or so and the subsequent behaviour of certain people has truly just got to me. So, on my own personal Facebook page, I expressed some of that frustration in 2 posts. I think that when you see an abomination, then you have not only the right, but the responsibility to at least point out where you stand. Now, I don't expect everybody to agree with me, of course, though the vast majority of engagements were in agreement. What really got to me was that a couple of, idiots, decided that it was their place on my personal Facebook page to tell me to just talk about hiking. And of course, they would often then go off on some unhinged, unintelligent diatribe that was poorly spelt and had only a passing acquaintance with good grammar. And of course, wrongly, I went down the rabbit hole, engaging with a few of them, initially respectfully, disagreeing with them, but then, when they persisted, I'm afraid my sarcasm indicator cranked up a little bit too much. I'm going to remove several friends from my personal page now, which is sad, but well, I'm not having that. If there is anybody out there I've offended, even though I take back nothing that I've posted, I apologise. But please remove yourself from my list, because with everything that's going on right now, I feel inclined to get involved in the conversation, and you may not like it. If you want to have a respectful dialogue, go for it. I'll be ready. If you just want to shout at me, well, we ain't going to be friends much longer. To everybody who was supportive, thank you. That support felt wonderful when I looked back at it all today. So, moving on to Phoenix. Okay, we're on again with Phoenix, or Kate. Hi, Kate. How are you?
I am doing very well. How are you, Steve?
I'm pretty good. And the last time we spoke, you were in Hamburg near Port Clinton getting your blistered feet sorted out. How are they now?
They've healed very nicely. The antibiotics, woo,
Yes.
They sort of kicked everything else into weird gear. But feet are great. The sprained ankle, it's an ongoing thing. certainly not helped by Rocksylvania.
We'll come back to that certainly about Rocksylvania, but the ankle itself, this is something you've had for quite some while now, isn't it?
Yes, a couple of days. And so at urgent care, I had them look at it. And he recommended, wearing a neoprene sleeve and using my leukotape to really bind it up. And so, that's effective along with 3 Advil twice a day. But it's nevertheless any wrong step on a pointy rock, which is I know you laugh because is there any other kind?
There is no other kind, is there?
Yeah. So, and then it shoots all the way to your brain, So it's been a very challenging finish to Pennsylvania because of that injury. Because my miles went from 1618 to 1310, depending on shelters and so on, and weather, because there were a few times I targeted going to a specific shelter because I knew that a storm was coming.
Yeah.
And last night being one of them, there was lightning and thunder so significant that the rocks under the shelter were rumbling.
Wow.
Yeah. I think the mice were all jumping out.
Nice. I'm sure they were. So, but you last time we did speak, you were about to hit what I called the real rocks. Was I right? Do you think?
Yes, you were right, and you bloody well were. I hate to say, no, you were right. There were some of the more technical rocks, which would have been a whole lot more fun if both feet were stable.
Sure.
I thought Knife's Edge was a gas.
Oh, did you? Did you really?
I did. I thought, yeah, because there really wasn't a whole lot of. It just was technical. It was more technical than anything else. Pulpit and what was the other? Is it called Dan's Pulpit? There's the other Pulpit, and then there's Pinnacle.
That's
Those
Pinnacle.
were okay.
Yeah.
They were okay.
All those are fine, but you're right. I see what I think it is, though. I think it's the fact that it's so wearing. It just it gnaws at you. The rocks there, don't they? But I wouldn't change it for the world personally. And also, of course, you've now done that fantastic climb up at Lehigh Gap. Did you enjoy that?
Well, let me put it this way. In the high seas, sometimes you see the buoy because you're on the top of the crest of the wave, and sometimes you don't because you're in the trough. Well, there are plenty of times on that climb that I think they needed more white blazes, because I saw these people scampering up, and because they were in gym shorts and T-shirts, and they're from Pennsylvania, so they're mountain goats anyway. But going up, I couldn't see the blazes a number of times.
Really?
And
interesting.
I literally found myself swearing, where in blazes is the next blaze? I can't see it. And I kept seeing these red arrows going, well, I know that can't be right.
Yeah.
So for my personality, if I know I'm on the path, then I just go for it. I figure it out. But having that doubt whether I'm even on the right, 15-foot or 20-foot section is enough to unsettle me a little bit more. So it became more challenging because of that.
How was the weather climbing up there?
I was so very fortunate for both of those, for Knife's Edge as well as Lehigh. It was an amazing day. It was absolutely the best possible day anyone could have climbed it. It was dry, it was breezy, it was cool, and it was sunny. Go for it. You really could not. I could not have picked a better day. I
don't remember noticing it first time, but certainly last year I noticed that how much I would have hated to go southbound at Lehigh Gap. That must be really difficult, especially if in the rain. But even without the rain, that would have been really difficult, I would think, wouldn't you?
Crazy, insane. And I know my daughter did it.
Of course, yes.
She went southbound. Yeah, as a Sobo, she did it. And, she did butt scooting, as she called it, because, and also, I'm sure you might remember going up last year, you had to carry a full complement of water. So not only did you have your pack weight, I had 6 pounds, 6 ounces of water.
Wow.
Because the next 10 miles, the next 20 miles really, were waterless miles.
Kate, I don't recall that at all. I know you sent me a message. I was going to ask you about the water issues. You're saying it went on for 20 miles without any chance of a refill?
Well, the only spring was a contaminated one with heavy metals. And I wound up stopping in Danielsville.
Right.
Because the woman, Kathy, who runs Filbert Bed and Breakfast, picks up at Little Gap. So, yeah, I mean, you come off the trail right into Little Gap parking lot. So she picked me up, and I didn't have to worry about water, and it was another 10 miles before there was water again.
I must admit, I don't recall that, but I'm going to look at my map again and try to work that one out. And you actually texted me that you found this really good B&B. So let's give them a shout out again. Who are they? Filberts. Filbert,
Filbert, Filbert. I think I sent you a picture.
You did, yeah.
Yeah. And so she picked me up, and it was interesting because, everything's takeout right now, and one place driver didn't show up. So she literally went to a restaurant to pick up my dinner for me,
nice.
Which was such a sweetheart thing to do.
Yeah.
And the next morning, breakfast was included, and it was potatoes, eggs, and bacon, all from family properties, farm to table.
Nice, very nice too. So you're at Delaware Water Gap. So the nightmare of the nightmare that can be Pennsylvania is now over. How do you feel about it?
I'm elated to have 270 miles done. I am psychologically uplifted that I did Maryland and Pennsylvania, and that I'm still have 2 legs and 2 arms and half a head left. I'm thrilled to looking forward to New Jersey. I'm so grateful to have a friend who is able to pick me up, and I think I'm doing 2 zeros here just to make sure that my ankle has some time to rest up a bit.
Yeah, good idea.
Then head on to New Jersey and parts north. So yeah,
I've got a bit more news for you, by the way. New Jersey, You think the Rocks are going to be over? They're not.
No.
In fact, you know what?
I know.
Now the Rocks don't stop till you get to Katahdin. But they are distinctly worse in Pennsylvania. But it's still surprisingly rocky. But I loved New Jersey, by the way, and I think it was the relief of actually surviving the rocks of Pennsylvania. But I wouldn't have it any other way, though. Would you? I still think it's a magnificent state to hike through, don't you?
Well, my biggest problem is that, especially with my ankle situation, I just could not take my eyes off 2 feet in front of me. So I very rarely had an opportunity to look up and enjoy, because there were very few stretches. But yes, there were moments that I enjoyed Pennslevania. I think it's a beautiful state.
You're glad it's over.
Yeah, no, the people were really nice, and weekends is crazy. Everybody heads for the trails. Yeah,
I know that they certainly did when we were out there as well. So, did you see many snakes? I only saw a couple of snakes in Pennsylvania. Everybody else tells me they saw loads and loads of them. Have you had any animal sightings so far?
Well, I saw 2 bears. I don't know if I told you about that one.
No.
2 juvenile.
No.
And they kind of scampered off.
Right.
I did see rattlesnakes, rat snakes, a copperhead,
wow, and
black and whitish long stripe snake. But basically it was uneventful. Thank goodness, because where you are, if you're bitten by a rattler or a copperhead, it's really not very good outcome.
That's right. Oh, dear. So you by yourself again now, or are you with hiking with people?
Actually, the fellow that I was hiking with when I spoke with you last, his trail name is Onward, and I continued to either leapfrog or cross each other or stay in the same shelter or campsite until today. He's now off into New Jersey.
Right.
So that was really nice. He was a terrific young man, and I hope he not only makes it, but as he said, he is going to go from Harper's after Katahdin. He's doing Harper's Ferry Springer, and I'm doing Springer Harper's Ferry. So we've decided we will definitely see each other on the trail.
Very cool. How very cool. Well, look, you're still doing great. 270 odd miles. And so I think one of the texts you sent me today, you actually have got the number of miles still to go to Katahdin. So what is that now?
900.
Oh, no distance at all. Not a problem at all.
Yeah, not at all. I survived PA. What can be worse? No.
Exactly.
Ha. No. All tongue in cheek. This is hard. There's no doubt about it. I'm hoping the trail will give me time to reflect, that as opposed to focused concentration that just taxes the brain and the eyes, and it was a bit morally debilitating at times as well. It's sort of...
What do you mean by that, Kate? What do you mean by that?
Well, after 3 days of the same kind of rocks, it's sort of like, can you give me a break here? I can't look at this anymore. My brain doesn't, so then you go, hey, you chose the trail. The trail is what it is. Accept it with grace.
It is.
And hey, wow, it's all in the attitude. Let's go.
Yeah, keep going.
So,
okay. All right, Kate. Well, look, we'll catch up with you again. You're doing real well now. You've passed Pennsylvania and you've still got miles and miles to go, but it's not easy, and I think you'll enjoy New Jersey. And I loved it myself, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. And I'll catch up with you soon. Okay?
You bet. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
She's still pushing forward. She seems pretty capable right now and has a really good attitude that will serve her well in the coming months. Before we get on to Grandma Gatewood, I want to thank you again for supporting the show through your donations. Some of you have been wonderfully supportive, so if you'd like to help out, just head on over to mightyblueontheat.com, click on the podcast page, and you will find the donate button there. Cheers. Finally, it's the rest of Chapter 14 of Grandma Gatewood's walk. Emma seems to have been embraced by the public and continues to find ways to get this hike done, just like Carolyn Gordon and Kate earlier. I'll see you next week. She stood that night all alone, just 280 miles from that little brown sign atop Mount Katahdin, her chest full of crisp air and inspiration, her feet firm atop a forgettable mountain where the stars make you feel insignificant and important all at once. And she sang. In the late 1800s, just before Emma was born, an old man began walking clockwise on a non-stop 365-mile ovular route between the Connecticut and Hudson rivers, a trip that took him precisely 34 days to complete. And then he did it again and again for more than 30 years. He was clothed entirely in leather. He had handmade a suit, jacket, pants, and hat out of hide, and he came to be called Old Leatherman. He slept in caves and natural shelters along his track where he kept gardens and stored food. Though he walked through dozens of towns, garnering enough attention after a few cycles that people set their watches by him, no one knew who he was. Although he was friendly enough to occasionally sit for a photograph, he didn't speak and only once in a while grunted something low and unintelligible. Some thought he was French. A myth developed about his origins, one that was never proven. The story had it that he was born Jules Bourglet in Lyon, France, and that as a young man he had fallen in love with the daughter of a wealthy leather trader. He asked the merchant for his daughter's hand, and the merchant struck a deal. If Bourglet would work for him for a year, he would give his blessing to the marriage. Bourglet agreed, but the business soon failed, due mostly to several of Bourglet's bad decisions. The wedding was off. Crushed, the young man went into hiding, then disappeared to the United States, where he set out on his continuous trip to walk his lover out of his mind, or assuage his guilt, or maybe none of that. Who is to know? Every eccentric needs a story, and if one is not provided, one will be created. Despite Old Leatherman's mystique, Edward Payson Weston was probably America's most famous pedestrian. In 1860, he bet his friend that Abraham Lincoln wouldn't win the presidency. In 1861, he walked nearly 500 miles from Boston to Washington, D.C. for Lincoln's inauguration, arriving a few hours late, but in time to attend the inaugural ball. He launched his pro career a few years later, walking 1,300 miles from Portland, Maine to Chicago in 26 days. 2 years later, he walked 5,000 miles for $25,000. 2 years after that, the showman walked backward for 200 miles. He competed in walking events against the best in Europe. Once in his old age, he staged a New York to San Francisco 100-day walk, but he arrived 5 days late. Peeved, he walked back to New York in 76 days. He told a reporter he wanted to become the propagandist for pedestrianism, to impart the benefits of walking to the world. A devout pedestrian, he preached walking over driving. Unfortunately, he was seriously injured in 1927 when a taxicab crashed into him in New York, confining him in a wheelchair for the remainder of his life. Weston wasn't the first long-distance walker who gained attention for his physical feats. Many came before him, including Lieutenant Halifax, who walked 600 miles in 20 days. Foster Powell walked 200 miles from London to York, England, and back in 5 days. In 1932, a man seen walking backward in Berlin turned out to be a Texan attempting to walk around the world backward, wearing special glasses affixed with mirrors. Later, in 1951, a New York couple claimed they had spent the previous 20 years walking city streets for a total of more than 15,000 miles. They said they had walked every single street of the 5 boroughs of New York City and had walked the varied boulevards of cities like Pittsburgh, Boston, Baltimore and Denver. They became known as America's walkingest couple. The celebrated Captain Robert Barclay, a Scot, deliberately walked a mile in each of 1,000 successive hours. The challenge took 6 weeks in 1809. If a normal human walks 3 to 4 miles per hour, then Barclay's attempt to walk just 1 mile per hour for 1,000 hours stood apart for the sheer difficulty in pacing. Once every hour he walked a mile and stopped to rest. Huge crowds came to watch, and journalists wrote of the event as if it were an edge-of-your-seat entertainment. Whether it was on a bet or to gain fame, to challenge oneself against nature, or to pay amends for a lost love, those noted walkers, most all of them, had a purpose. In most cases, they let it be known. Mildred Lamb even wore a blue tunic that said Peace Pilgrim on the front and 25,000 miles on foot for peace on the back. But the cases in which the motivations were held secret, as with old Leatherman, observers by nature had to create a story to understand why one was set out on foot, leaving the shelters we build to plant us in civilization and set us apart from the world, the cars and the houses and offices. To follow a path great distances, to open oneself to the world and a multitude of unexpected experiences, to voluntarily face the wrath of nature unprotected, was difficult to understand. Emma Gatewood was coy when people asked why, at her age, she had decided to strike out on the long trail. As America's attention turned more toward Emma in her final days on the AT, as newspaper reporters ramped up their dispatches to update the public on her condition and whereabouts, she offered an assortment of reasons about why she was walking. The kids were finally out of the house. She heard that no woman had yet thru-hiked in one direction. She liked nature. She thought it would be a lark. "I want to see what's on the other side of the hill, then what's beyond that," she told a reporter from Ohio. Any one of the answers could stand on its own, but viewed collectively, the diversity of responses left her motivation open to interpretation, as though she wanted people to seek out their own conclusions, if there were any to be made. Maybe each answer was honest. Maybe she was trying to articulate that exploring the world was a good way to explore her own mind. On the morning of September the 3rd, a man appeared on the mountainside east of the Maine state line. He was out of breath and looked exhausted. Emma introduced herself. The huffing man asked how far away he was from the nearest lean-to, and she told him not too far. He said he was pooped from crawling through and climbing over rocks. He was carrying a large pack on his shoulders, and he told Emma she was lucky hers was small. She soon found out what he meant. Before her was Mahoosic Notch, widely regarded as the most difficult mile on the Appalachian Trail. The narrow notch was hemmed in between 2 rocky mountain walls, clogged with cabin-sized boulders and gnarly root clusters, and speckled by deep caves. She climbed slowly, carefully, over and under the slippery, moss-covered boulders, and at times she had to lumber a pack through tight crevices and climb through behind it. It took 2 hours to make it out of the notch, and she was worn out by the time she got through, but still she continued on a few more miles. She slept the night at the shelter by Speck Pond, the highest lake in Maine, and woke the next morning to cold rain, pattering at first, then turning to fat, freezing, percussive drops that would make sane people scramble for shelter. She had blown out another pair of shoes, the side of one and the toe of the other. She had mended them with some string, but they wouldn't hold much longer, and they did nothing to protect her feet from the wet or the biting cold. She wasn't near any town, so she had no choice but to deal with the misfortune. She pushed over Old Speck Mountain, the state's third highest peak and rough up and down, then through Grafton Notch and up Baldpate Mountain, which is topped by a slippery sheet of rock. Near the peak, at 3,662 feet, the cold rain turned to sleet, and she had to crawl on her hands and knees to keep from sliding off the face. To make matters worse, she was nearly blind. The only pair of glasses she could find had one lens, and it was fogged over. She cleared it constantly with her fingers or sleeve, but the world through one blind eye and one fog-tinted lens was an unusual and treacherous place. A misstep on much of the trail would have meant an injured ankle, but here on the sheer rock that was quickly accumulating ice, it could have meant plummeting to instant death. Or maybe that, instant death, would have been better than, say, winding up debilitated at the bottom of some hole, exposed to the elements, freezing or starving to death. She stepped carefully. She came to a rock ledge about 8 feet high, where she had to toss a sack to the ground below and climb down on a wet rope. She gripped it firmly, like she had held 1,000 hoes, and slowly worked her way down. A little later she arrived at a menacing crevice. The trail went straight across, and realizing she'd have to actually jump to the other side, she peered over the edge. Down in the pit, someone had painted a sign that read, "Go fast." Emma tossed her sack across the gap and took a quick few steps on a bad knee and jumped, a great-grandmother aloft, then landed safely on the other side. It was dark by the time she came upon an old shack near Fry Brook. The place looked to be an abandoned sporting camp. It was nice and clean, so she climbed in through a broken window and made herself at home. She spread out old magazines on the floor and lay down atop the thin pallet of pictures and words, bundled against the cold night. She walked across a paved mountain road the next day and noticed a man mowing along the shoulder on a tractor. Emma walked right up to him and introduced herself. He was Mr. Reid. She asked him how far it was to the nearest town where she could buy a new pair of shoes. He looked down and noticed the strings holding hers together. 6 miles that way, he said, pointing, or 20 miles that way. She didn't want to walk that far for shoes, even if the pair on her feet wouldn't last much longer. The two talked for a while, and Emma explained what she was doing. Mr. Reid told her he had a pair of sneakers at his house that he'd let her have, but he lived 20 miles away himself. Reid figured that if she could make it to the next road that intersected the trail by evening, he could have his wife meet her with the sneakers. Emma was grateful. She said goodbye and headed off, over Wyman Mountain and Hall Mountain, down through Sawyer Notch and up over Moody Mountain. When she appeared on the road, there sat Mr. Reid's wife and daughter. They'd gone into town and bought Emma a brand new pair of white sneakers. Emma loosened the laces and began to slide in one foot, but the shoes were much too small. Somehow Mr. Reid had misunderstood and given his wife the wrong size. Mrs. Reid apologised profusely and insisted Emma come to their home for the night. She said they'd bring her back to the trail in the morning, so Emma agreed. Mrs. Reid did Emma's laundry that night in their electric washing machine. The daughter called her friend, an avid hiker, and they made plans to accompany Emma the next day. They made it back to the trail later than Emma would have liked on September the 6th, but she had enjoyed the company and a warm place to sleep, so she didn't complain. The daughter and her friend set off with Emma, who was wearing new shoes, and took turns carrying her pack. They ate lunch at a shelter on Elephant Mountain, then hiked on, and though the trail was covered with blowdowns and obstacles, they all had an enjoyable day, putting in about 10 miles. Mrs. Reid met them to fetch the girls. She had brought a camera along and took pictures of the girls with Emma beside an Appalachian Trail sign. Emma walked on, alone, to Sabbath Day Pond, where she slept inside a lean-to, then shot across some hilly terrain to the Piazza Rock lean-to. Then, on a knee that was really beginning to ache, she leaned into the tiresome, steep climb up Saddleback Mountain, 4,120 feet high. The cold wind blew through her layers of clothing, but she sat anyway to eat a snack on Saddleback and absorb the incredible view from the open crest. She saw on the dark horizon the Boundary Mountains, dividing the United States and Canada. She sensed a storm moving in, and as the sun fell, the cold hung hard around her. She made it to a lean-to at Poplar Ridge and hunkered down against the bight. She didn't know what the stretch just ahead held for her, but it had been damning to previous hikers. Not long before, the entire section had been closed, marked with a sign that warned, "Trail closed, in bad condition to Bigelow. Travel at your own risk." This had been the last remote stretch of trail to be completed on the entire AT. In fact, the trail through Maine almost ended before it was started. By 1933, construction and linkage of the trail was underway in most areas, but not northern New England. Some thought the trail should end at New Hampshire's Mount Washington because blazing the AT through Maine's rugged wilderness would make it difficult to access and maintain. After a 2-year study, a proposed route for the trail appeared in the 1933 issue of In the Maine Woods, and Myron Avery began convincing volunteers and the Civilian Conservation Corps to help. They measured the trail, built campsites and drew maps. However, much of their work was done hastily in an effort to extend the trail through to Katahdin. In August 1937, the final section was completed on the north slope of Spalding Mountain, but the problem of maintenance would persist. Through the 1940s, hurricane blowdowns and new logging operations caused the trail to fall into disrepair. Many of the trail volunteers were sent off to war, so it stayed in bad shape until the 1950s, when efforts to restore the path began anew. Earl Schaefer, the first thru-hiker in 1948, experienced much of that difficulty. He wrote that the terrain in spots had been wrecked by a hurricane, with summer growth and brush pushing through fallen trees, and another stretch was on corduroy, left from winter logging operations. Cross logs were suspended across the trail on stumps and slash, and the snow had melted, leaving them exposed and rotting. How hazardous this was can be imagined, he wrote. And here came Emma, 6 years later, plodding along through stones and stumps, her knee getting worse with each footfall, up 4,250 feet of rock called Sugarloaf, past the ski lift, then down the other side and out onto the highway. There she met Mr. and Mrs. Richard Bell, who were spending a week at a friend's cabin and invited Emma to sit down for some breakfast. Her knee was throbbing and swollen. After breakfast, Richard Bell positioned Emma and his 2 young daughters by a trail sign and snapped their photograph before Emma cut away. A fall storm was moving in as Emma hobbled on. She couldn't make it far. Her leg was hurting so badly. She stopped early at Horns Pond and ducked into a log shelter built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. It would have to do for the night. She couldn't walk any farther. The next day was the same, only now she was fully limping, trying to keep weight off her knee, and the grey sky had opened, dumping rain on the wilderness, which was followed by a bitterly cold wind. She'd only made it a few miles, but Emma stopped at a shelter on Mount Bigelow to attempt to dry her things and thaw her fingers and toes. She tried to build a small fire near the shelter, but each time she made a little progress, the strong gusts of wind blew most of the precious heat away. She tried again and again until she was frustrated. She gave up and was stomping out the few embers when a man walked up behind her. His presence startled her. Turn over. New paragraph. The man was the forest warden for the region, Mr. Vose, and he'd been looking for Emma. There was an item about her from the United Press in the newspaper. Farmington, Maine. A 67-year-old grandmother from Gallipolis, Ohio, neared the end of a 2,050-mile hike on the Appalachian Trail today. Mrs. Emma Gatewood, the hiker, is within 110 miles of her destination, Mount Katahdin, Maine. She expects to reach the mountain in a fortnight. Mrs. Gatewood, a sturdy 5 feet 4 inches, started from Oglethorpe, Georgia, on the Appalachian Trail last May the 2nd. Mount Katahdin is the end of the trail. Mrs. Gatewood carries a light shoulder pack with a raincoat, blanket, and enough food to last her between stopovers. She walks only about 8 miles a day now because of a lame leg. Why the long walk? Mrs. Gatewood, who has 11 children, 23 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren, put it this way. After 20 years of hanging diapers and seeing my children grow up and go their own way, I decided to take a walk, one I always wanted to take. The warden invited Emma to his cabin not far away. It was warm inside and the fire felt good. She was happy to get out of the rain and cold, to have a chance to dry her belongings and give her knee a rest. There was still plenty of daylight left, but the warden advised Emma against going out on the trail again. The rain and cold were too much, and the stretch to the northeast was still damaged from a hurricane. He told her she couldn't get through the blowdown before nightfall. She took his advice. He left the cabin to finish his shift, and while he was gone, Emma busied herself with chores. She washed the dishes, washed and dried her clothes, and fetched 2 buckets of spring water from the stream down the mountain apiece. She mopped the cabin floors and made biscuits and popped a skillet of popcorn over the dancing fire. The smell hit the warden when he came in from work. He was surprised and happy to see his place tidy and his supper made. He pulled a spare mattress from under his bed and made a pallet on the floor. The 2 strangers slept soundly to morning.